He proposed a design that could save thousands of lives. The command laughed at him and took away his blueprint. But what happened next silenced them for decades. Let me tell you something, straight from a man who's seen more plans fall apart than sandbags in the rain. They don't want you to fix the problem. They want you to play your part, quiet, obedient, and preferably invisible. And I was none of those things. I was a colored engineer in the U.S. Army Corps, 1944. Smart enough to see what was coming, dumb enough to speak up about it. And the moment I opened my mouth, the whole weight of the war machine came down. Not on Hitler, not on the enemy, but on me. It started with a damn ramp. A bridge, really. The temporary modular landing platform for the D-Day beaches. Lightweight, reinforced, could be assembled in under 30 minutes by 6 men. I spent months designing it with a team of 6. 3 white, 2 black, 1 Puerto Rican. All of us shoved in a hangar near Southampton, eating cold beans and burning through pencils. Our idea? Keep tanks from sinking in soft sand. Give the boys a real chance to move once their boots hit Europe. Simple, practical. Tested it twice. Held up better than any of the old wood plank garbage the brass was still pushing. But when we submitted it to Engineering Command, silence. Weeks of silence. Then came the meeting. The room where progress goes to die. The place smelled like wet uniforms and stale cigars, concrete walls, metal chairs, and men in stiff uniforms who looked like they'd been carved out of sandbags, pale, bloated, and hard of hearing. I was the only black man in the room, probably the only one without a family name etched somewhere on a university building. Colonel Branson, short, red-faced, voice like a kettle about to blow, opened his folder like he was about to read scripture. "Mr. Freeman," he said, without looking up, "your proposal is noted. Not accepted, not reviewed, noted. We have standard operating procedures for a reason," he added. "The Higgins ramps work. They worked in Sicily. They worked in Salerno, and they'll work in Normandy. They didn't. Not in loose sand, not under fire, and not with 70 tons of steel rolling over them. I tried to explain. Calm, professional, facts in hand. 'Colonel,' I said, 'those older platforms aren't tested for the shorelines we've surveyed. The sediment density.' He raised a hand, like I was a child interrupting Sunday school. 'This is not a classroom, Mr. Freeman. We have no time for theoretical improvements. Stick to your assigned role.' That's when I knew. It wasn't the ramp they didn't trust. It was me. When truth becomes insult. You ever try telling a man in uniform that he's wrong? Not politely, not angrily, just honestly. They act like you lit their medals on fire. Later that afternoon, I overheard Major Kilroy, one of the real old-school types, gray mustache, boots always polished, talking to another officer outside the mess tent. Didn't know I was behind the tent flap. That Freeman boy's got too many ideas, always in the papers with those calculations. We don't need another genius. We need soldiers who follow orders. That one stung. Boy, not engineer, not specialist, not sir even, just boy. The test that should have changed everything. We ran the test anyway, unofficial, unapproved, but we had friends. One of the Navy guys owed my buddy Leon a favor. Let us haul out a section of beach platform and test it under cover of darkness. May 28th. Foggy, damp, wind coming off the channel. We laid out the ramp in 32 minutes, tied it into the sand with 6 reinforced stakes, brought in a Churchill tank double-weighted with extra fuel drums, and it rolled across that ramp like butter on toast. No cracks, no sink, No collapse. It worked. It worked. You'd think that'd be enough. You'd think saving lives would earn a seat at the table. But you'd be wrong. The report that buried us. 2 days later, I was reassigned. No explanation, no hearing, no warning. An envelope on my bunk. Transfer orders to Ordnance Logistics. Effective immediately. Pending further review of conduct. Conduct? I didn't curse. I didn't disobey. I didn't break rank. I just told the truth. And the truth, apparently, was conduct unbecoming of a colored man with a clipboard. They moved me to a storage depot near Portsmouth. Concrete walls, no windows. My job? Count barrels, update inventory, stamp forms. From engineer to pencil pusher in 48 hours. They don't fire you. They bury you alive. The thing is that they didn't want to punish me. Not publicly. That would make it real. No, they wanted to erase me. Quietly, like I never built that ramp, like I never made that speech, like I never existed. And maybe it would have worked. But there were whispers. I heard from a friend still at Engineering Command. They were planning to use a version of our ramp after all, slightly modified, branded under another officer's name. And I was just a line on a reassignment form, invisible again. But I wasn't done yet. What happened next changed everything. You're not going to want to miss what came after they tried to shut me up for good. They thought they moved me off the board, thought pushing me into a backroom office with a stack of carbon copies and a leaky ceiling would make me disappear. Out of sight, out of mind. Thing is, I wasn't trying to be seen. I was trying to be heard. They never figured the difference. The new place they dumped me into was a drafty depot somewhere behind a rail yard, just outside of Portsmouth. Concrete walls, smell of oil and mildew, rats the size of house cats. My office had 1 desk, 3 filing cabinets, and a broken window that whistled every time the wind shifted. My job? Count things. Crates, shells, metal parts stamped with serial numbers I wasn't allowed to question. Every box, every bolt, every pound of cement logged and filed with care. Like the war depended on forms, not men. They called it logistics. I called it a slow burial. But I kept my mouth shut. At least for a little while. Not because I was beaten. I wasn't. Not because I was scared. Not exactly. But because I was watching. The walls talk in places like that. The depot was the kind of place they sent the folks who didn't fit anywhere else. Not fired, not promoted, just misplaced. There was Eddie Thomas, a supply clerk who used to fly cargo planes until he questioned why medical shipments kept disappearing from Manifest. There was Louisa Grant, a widowed typist with better math than the finance officers and a habit of correcting their mistakes in red ink. And then there was me, James Freeman, engineer without a project, designer without a title, and we all saw it. The quiet way the system refiled people, not under problem, under unseen. One day in early June I caught something strange. Box of equipment came in from the Coastal Division, marked confidential, non-standard, field adapted. That label? It meant field modifications. Usually it meant someone broke the rules, and it worked. So I opened the manifest, careful not to breathe too loud. Inside, a drawing, a rough sketch, measurements, materials. And I recognized it, every line, every bolt, every anchor angle. It was our ramp, the one we tested, the one they buried. Only now it was going into production. But the author, not me. A white lieutenant's name stamped in bold at the top. Someone I never met. Someone who wasn't on the beach that foggy morning. Someone who'd never lifted a wrench or counted a ripple in wet sand. I sat there, holding that paper like it was burning my fingers. So, that's how it works. You build the thing, They laugh. You test it. They ignore it. You prove it. They take it. And stamp another name on top like yours never existed. I didn't throw the paper. Didn't rip it. That would have been too clean. Instead, I copied it. Not officially, just enough to remember. Then I folded the original, slid it back in the file, closed the cabinet, and kept walking. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood the game. This wasn't about winning. Not yet. This was about staying in it. And that meant playing smart. But you can't stay quiet forever. The more time passed, the more cracks showed. Young privates coming into the depot with beach assignments, whispering that their commanding officers were scrambling to adapt new landing procedures, that platforms were being changed, that someone up high had found a new kind of ramp. I nodded and said nothing, but inside I was boiling. I wasn't mad about the credit. I was mad about the cost, because I knew what it took to get that design field ready, and I knew what it cost the men who tried to speak up before it was too late. Then came the inspection. 3 officers, all stripes and salutes, barged into the depot one morning like they were chasing spies. White gloves on, clipboards ready. I was logging crate weights in Bay 4 when I heard my name. Freeman. Office now. Lieutenant Marchand. Young, sharp, slick uniform, fresh boots. Not a speck of dust on him. You could smell ambition on his collar. I followed him. He shut the door behind us, sat down, crossed his legs like he was posing for a portrait. "Tell me about your time in engineering corps." His voice was polite. Too polite. I kept it short. "Drafted under contract. Logistics design. Worked under Colonel Branson." He tapped his pen on his folder. "You were involved in a prototype field ramp system?" I blinked. Slow. "I submitted designs, that's on record. And you tested one, yes?" Unofficially. He nodded, but his smile never moved. "Mr. Freeman, we believe your work was ahead of its time. The Army recognizes that." I didn't say anything, because you don't give a man a compliment when your hand's still holding the knife. The offer that wasn't then, he said it. "There may be an opportunity for you to rejoin Engineering Command in a support capacity." Support. That word again. Not engineer, not lead, not even advisory. Support. I asked him flat out, "And the ramp?" He paused. "That's no longer your concern." And there it was. They wanted me close enough to silence, far enough from credit. I leaned forward, looked him in the eye. "You're not giving me a job. You're putting a lid on me." He said nothing, just closed the folder and left. But I wasn't a lid kind of man. They thought I'd say yes, thought I'd take the corner desk, the backseat title, the wink and nod of quiet recognition. But I didn't, because I wasn't in this for a promotion. I was in it to save lives, and I knew now they'd rather bury truth than face the face who spoke it. This is the moment everything cracked open. You waited for the turn, and here it is. Stay with me to see what I did next, when they tried to lock the doors for good. What if Normandy had failed? Sounds like an alternate history, but behind it lie real mistakes, real heroes, and real risks that could have cost us another 4 years of war. If you care about stories that reveal the truth, ask uncomfortable questions, and show how the system almost failed on that fateful day. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the sequel. What do you think? Would the landing have worked if everything had gone according to the bureaucratic plan? Write in the comments. We value the opinions of those who are not afraid to look deeper into history. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. But truth, in a place like that, walks with a limp. The morning it happened, the depot was buzzing louder than usual, not because anything exploded. That would have been too simple. No, it was the kind of buzz that happens when too many officers start showing up where they don't belong. You see a man in stars, clipboard in hand, boots too clean for mud. You start paying attention. Turns out they were pulling new beach logistics for the next wave of deployment. Engineers, transport command, a couple of naval staff, all suddenly interested in supply chain details they ignored for months. And right there, bold as brass, taped to the inside of a glass briefing case, FMS 9 Modified Landing Ramp, Series B, sketch, specs, weight ratios, assembly time, my damn design, almost line for line. Except now it wasn't mine. It was authorized. It was Army issue. And the signature at the bottom, Lieutenant McAllister, a name I'd only seen on copied memos and backside gossip. That's the game, right? You don't need to steal a man's boots if you can just walk over his back. I stood there in the corridor, 5 feet from the chart, watching white-gloved officers tap the glass and nod like they'd uncovered fire. Behind me, a young private passed by, pushing a cart of ration crates. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "They say this thing's gonna save lives," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "It might," I wanted to shout. Tear the page down, drag in my sketchbooks, my field notes, the photos from the test. But who would listen? They weren't interested in proof. They were interested in ownership. The quiet war behind the war. Later that day, I got pulled into another meeting. Same wood-paneled office. Same chairs that creaked when you leaned too hard. Same fake plants collecting dust in corners. Colonel Branson was there, along with 2 new faces. Civilian contractors from Washington, both wearing suits too stiff for bending. One of them, glasses, salt and pepper hair, voiced like a dentist, spoke first. "Mr. Freeman, we're here to formally acknowledge your earlier contributions to the FMS landing adaptation." He said it like a man reading the back of a cereal box. "Your initial materials provided useful groundwork for our updated platform. However, due to procedural structure and the timing of official testing protocols, credit will be attributed under field application leadership." Translation: "You started it, kid, but we're giving it to someone in uniform." I stared at the man, then turned to Branson. "Sir, are you saying I'm not listed anywhere in the field record?" Branson cleared his throat, suddenly fascinated with the papers in front of him. "It's a delicate process. We're focused on outcome, not attribution." And just like that, it was done. They handed me a certificate of technical support. No name on the design, no citation, just a polite letter saying thanks for your service, as if I'd just patched a tire. But the men knew. A week later, a young staff sergeant named Reynolds came through the depot. He'd been at one of the early drops. Beach sector, Charlie Red. He was missing his left boot. Mud caked to his pants. Faced like he hadn't slept since the landing. He walked straight up to my desk, dropped a dented metal bracket in front of me, one of the locking pins from the ramp assembly. "This yours?" I picked it up, ran my thumb along the groove. I'd cut that notch by hand during prototyping to make the pin fit tight against sand shift. "Yeah," I said. "It's mine," he nodded. "Thought so. I told my boys. Somebody built this with their hands. Somebody who knew we'd be out there alone in that water." He didn't salute, didn't shake my hand, just looked at me, like a man looks at a clock he trusts to keep ticking. "Thanks," he said. "Don't let 'em bury you." And then he was gone. what you can't say. Out loud, you write down. That night, went back to my bunk. Didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling and listened to the pipes groan. Somewhere out there, my design was saving lives, doing what I built it to do. But in the reports, I was just another quartermaster tucked under a logistics roll call, so I started writing. Every piece, every note, every test, names, dates, faces, not for the army, for the truth. Because they could take the credit, the files, even the drawing. But they couldn't take what happened. You don't get to pretend you didn't see it. I still had my copy, still had my field journal, still had that pin. The one Reynolds left on my desk like a war medal that didn't need a ceremony. And more than that, I had memory. You can burn paper, but you can't burn what a man knows when he was there, when he built it, when he stood in a room full of silence and still tried to speak. You think this is the end of the fight? Not even close. Stick around. It only gets louder from here. The hardest part ain't getting pushed out. It's staying close enough to watch what they do with what they stole from you, while pretending you don't see it. After a while, the silence becomes its own kind of noise. Loud in your chest. Quiet in the hallways. Like everyone around you agreed to a story you weren't invited to help write. That's where I was. Not out, not in, just orbiting the machine I helped build. The ceremony. I wasn't invited to word got around quick. There was going to be a commendation ceremony. Small, internal, non-public, they said. Just something to acknowledge innovation under fire. And right there on the bulletin board in the logistics office, a typed announcement. Lieutenant E. McAllister, recognized for tactical engineering contributions to the FMS landing system. They even gave him a medal. Not a big one. Not flashy, but shiny enough to catch a man's eye through a cracked office window. I stood behind the loading dock that day. Watched through a sliver in the warehouse door as they pinned it to his chest. Men in uniforms clapped like they knew what it meant. He saluted. They smiled. And somewhere between the speeches and the sandwiches, I realized something. They needed a face. Not the work. Just a face. And they picked one they could polish. They thought I'd be bitter. I was tired. People assume betrayal hits like a punch. But it doesn't. It settles in slow, like dust. You notice it when your coffee tastes flat. When the papers don't stack right. When you reach for a tool that used to be yours, but now has someone else's name etched into the handle. That's how it felt walking through that depot. Everything in place, but none of it mine. Not really. Then came Washington. About 2 weeks after the ceremony, I got another summons. But this one wasn't local. It was typed with a different font, different tone, and at the bottom, the seal of the War Department. I was being called to D.C., no reason given, no schedule, just report immediately. I packed my things, kept it neat, didn't ask questions, learned that lesson already. The train ride took 2 days, windows rattled, coffee lukewarm, nobody looked anybody in the eye. When I arrived, a man in a gray overcoat met me at the platform. Didn't give a name, just nodded once and said, "This way." The interview that wasn't. They didn't take me to an office, not at first. They brought me to a long corridor lined with closed doors. No names, no noise, just that government quiet, like everything's cushioned in felt and denial. Finally, one of the doors opened. Inside, table, 2 chairs. One man already seated. He had a file in front of him, thick, worn, corners bent. He didn't stand up, didn't shake my hand, just flipped the folder open and said, "You're James Freeman." Not a question, I nodded. You designed the FMS prototype. Still not a question. That design has now been implemented in 4 sectors. It's proven effective under combat conditions. I said nothing. He leaned back, tapped his pen against the edge of the file. "We're here to determine what you want." That's when I laughed. Couldn't help it. Wasn't loud, wasn't mean. Just one of those tired chuckles that comes from deep in the ribs. "You're late," I said. "Excuse me." "That question, what I want, it's about 3 months late. Maybe more." He frowned, like I'd stepped out of line, like honesty wasn't part of the script. The offer that sounded like a favor. He slid a document across the table. "We're prepared to offer you a reclassification. Senior engineer. Advisory role. Backdated recognition in the system. No public statement. No credit where it matters. But a bigger desk and a fancier title." I looked him in the eye. "You offering this to fix something, or to keep me quiet?" He blinked. Didn't answer. Which was the answer? The choice. I took the paper, read it top to bottom. It was clean, legal, safe. It would make the past go down easier, would give me access, maybe even influence. But it would also mean letting them write the ending. I slid it back across the table. "No," I said. "You're turning it down?" "I didn't do this for a nameplate." He tilted his head. "Then what did you do it for?" I stood up. "So the next guy doesn't have to." Walking out with nothing and everything. I left the building without ceremony. No guards, no escort. Just me in a city that barely looked up. But I walked out with something they couldn't file away. I knew what I did, and they did too. Let them dress it in silence. Let them pin medals and write memos. At the end of the day, a design doesn't care whose name is on it. It only cares if it works. And mine did. Think that was the end? Not even close. There's still one more reckoning coming. Stay with me. You'll want to see how it landed. You ever wonder what happens when a man walks away from the table? Not storming out, not yelling, just walking. It doesn't make headlines, doesn't move generals or rewrite policy. But sometimes, that quiet walk is the loudest thing you'll ever do. That's what I learned. Not in the war, not in the meetings, in the years after. The war didn't end in 45 for me. Victory came with parades, sure, flags, cheers, ticker tape floating like dreams down onto brass hats and proud chests. But where I was, no celebration, just paperwork, just inventory. They sent me back to the depot. No medal, no letter, no handshake, just a reinstated stamp and another stack of requisition forms. And you know what? I showed up anyway. Not for them, for the people still out there trying to fix things from the inside. You want to know what resistance looks like? Sometimes it's a man in coveralls, showing up every morning with a clipboard full of corrections. A new engineer walked in. 2 months after I got back, a young man showed up in a depot. Private, sharp eyes, nervous hands. Carried himself like he'd spent most of his life being told to stay in line. Name was Avery. Fresh from tech school. Black, like me. First day in the Corps, full of questions. And there was this moment. I caught him standing by the wall display, staring at a framed schematic of the landing ramp. The official version. He turned to me and said, "Sir, did you ever see one of these used in action?" I nodded. "I built it," he blinked. "You mean, assembled it?" "No," I said. "I built it. And then I saw it, that shift in his shoulders. That stillness, it was the moment a young man realized truth doesn't always wear a badge. Teaching without a classroom, Avery started sticking close. Not in a bothersome way, more like a shadow trying to learn how to cast itself. He asked smart questions, listened more than he talked. I taught him how to test metal for tension using heat discoloration, how to tell good welds from lazy ones by sound alone, how to keep two sets of records, the ones they asked for and the ones that told the real story. And I never once said, "Remember my name," because it wasn't about that. It was about making sure the system didn't eat another man whole. Recognition came late. Real late. It was the fall of 1962 when a package came in the mail. No return address. Just a thick envelope with Army stationery. Inside was a single sheet. Typed. Plain. It said, "Upon internal review of engineering contributions related to Allied landing operations, James E. Freeman is hereby acknowledged for prototype design work implemented during Operation Neptune. No medal, no money, just words." I taped it inside the back cover of my field journal, not out of pride, but because that's where it belonged, right next to grease stains and hand-drawn bolts. Truth doesn't expire. Years passed, war turned into memory, names faded, files got boxed up and pushed into basements colder than the one they first put me in. But the ramps, they stuck around, not on posters, not in museums, but in field manuals, in blueprints passed down, in the way new platforms were built when old ones failed. And every once in a while I'd see something, a report, a photo, a dusty model, and I'd think, yeah, that's mine. And no one could take that. They'll remember the work. Maybe that's enough. I'm not looking for a plaque, or a building with my name on it. All I ever wanted was for the next man to stand a little taller. Not because I told him to, but because I showed him how. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not applause, not promotions, just a straight line drawn through crooked years, and someone else finding it, steady and clear, when it matters most. That's the end of the story. Not because the fight stopped, but because I finally stepped out of the ring, knowing I didn't swing for myself. I swung for every man who was told to wait his turn, and did the right thing anyway. They were sitting in my garage, drinking my beer, and laughing like they hadn't just kicked me out of my own house 9 days ago. Greg had his boots on my workbench, the same bench I'd built with my own hands back when this house was just studs and dreams. Tommy had the nerve to light a cigar. And my daughter, she didn't say a word, just sat there like silence was some kind of apology. "So," Greg said, slapping his beer on the bench, "looks like you're finally one of us, huh?" I didn't answer, not right away. Because what do you say to that? To the man who married your daughter and then made her believe you are too old, too slow, too in the way? What do you say to a guy who changed your garage code while you were unconscious in a hospital bed? You don't say anything. You look. And I looked at him like I used to look at the engine of my '67 Mustang when I knew it wasn't purring right. With patience, with quiet calculation, and with every ounce of grit I had left. Greg thought he'd won. Hell, maybe they all did. But the thing about a man like me, you don't get to bury us while we're still breathing. "You gonna say anything?" Tommy asked, chuckling like a guy who hadn't worked a day past 3 p.m. in his life. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, not angry, not loud, just ready. "You know what the difference is between me and you, Tommy?" He looked at me, half laughing, half confused. I pointed to the rack of tools behind him. When something breaks, I fix it. You wait for someone else to clean it up. Tommy's smile faded. Greg raised an eyebrow. And my daughter, she looked down. Good, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the damn floorboards of my own life. The letter had arrived 2 days earlier. Certified mail, thick envelope. Inside, a signed agreement from the city, a permit, and the deed to the new workshop space. 2,000 square feet. Downtown already half paid from the settlement money they thought I was too stupid to claim. Funny thing about being a nobody, people stop looking over your shoulder. They don't notice the meetings, the calls, the paperwork you've been filing while they're laughing over your cold steak in the dining room you built. I'd been busy. You're gonna regret this little attitude of yours, Greg said. You're not as strong as you think. I tilted my head. No, I said. I'm stronger than you hoped I'd be. I turned to my daughter then, not to argue, not to beg, but to let her see the man they tried to erase was still here, still solid, still Dad. I start construction Monday, I said. Workshops downtown, big windows, good light. You're welcome to visit, if you can find the guts to walk in. I left them there, in my garage with my beer, because soon enough the locks would change again. But this time I'd be the one holding the remote, and I wouldn't be letting just anyone in. Want more of this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments, real ones, not just emojis. And if you're still reading, that means something in this hit home, so hit that subscribe. This ain't the end, it's just the next chapter.